Welcome back to Joy in Our Town, and today we're talking about single parenting. We're so honored to have as our special guest Bill McLeod, a single parent who's got some information for us, some things he's derived by both having special guests on his local radio program, but also through the experience that he's encountered raising children. We're going to talk a little bit about communication. Communication is a very necessary tool for communicating, for harmony, for a healthy relationship. How do you learn to communicate properly with your children?
Well, I think one of the most important things you do is realize when your children are ready to communicate with you. You know, kids don't, it's an age, it all depends on age. You know, a 3-year-old is different than communicating with a teenager. And what I've been able to find is that most children have that special time when they're ready to talk. And we all know when our children are, in my case, it's when I pick the kids up from school. They're just chatterboxes. They want to tell you everything that's going on. As the day goes on, they're going to quiet down. A lot of times it's when they wake up in the morning. So I think as parents, we all have to remember, when is it most important that or when is it our children are most willing to open up? And when they do, just sit back and listen, because they'll talk about their entire day.
And obviously there's more than one way to communicate. It's not all verbal. How else do you communicate?
We're communicating every single day with our children. We are modeling for our children, and in essence, communicating with them through our actions, our deeds, what we do. You know, one of the things I think is always important to do is a book of service time with your children, where you can actually go out to the community and help, because you're communicating to your children what your values are, what your morals are, and what you believe is important. And that can go as far as just being able to verbally communicate with your kids on any given day as well.
For all of us, we're married or single. Children tune us out. What do you do during that period?
You know, again, there's times that children aren't going to want to talk to you. I think what we all have a tendency to do as parents is we try to impart our wisdom and our experience and our knowledge upon our children. And there's times that we can't just force them to communicate. And that's, I find more times than not with my kids, when they tune me out, is because I'm trying to bring up a subject that just they don't want to deal with. Now, if it's a subject about homework not being done or school, we're going to deal with it regardless, but that's the parenting side of me. But with that said, is that there are times that children just aren't ready to talk, and you can't force them to talk, and if you try to force them to communicate, you're really not going to have a fair dialogue with them. So I suggest that everybody just sit back, wait for those prime opportunities, and they will come. They'll come each and every day for you, and then when they come, just sit back and let it flow.
I know that you deal with a lot of divorced parents, and sometimes children have been used to communicate something that perhaps the ex wants to communicate. How do you keep things like that? How do you keep kids from being used? What do you suggest?
You know, you really can't keep the child from being used as much as you really have to sit down with your ex. I mean, the last thing you ever want to do as a divorced parent is use your child as an intermediary to try to relay a message. I mean, this thought of sending your child off with their dad and saying, well, you know, you tell dad I want you back at 5 o'clock. Well, who's the child and who's the parent here? Pick up the phone, tell dad 5 o'clock is the time, or whatever it may be, or we're not going to be available Wednesday. But never ever use your child. Your child does not want to be an intermediary. In fact, they don't want to be in the situation they're in 9 times out of 10. So ideally, it's just the worst thing you can possibly do is use them as a messenger.
One of your communication tools is the 90-second rule.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
90-second rule I actually learned from Jim Fannin, a life coach to numerous professional athletes, amazing guy. And what Jim talks about is really those opportunities to build self-esteem and communicate with your children. And what it is, it's the 90 seconds. It's the first 90 seconds you see your child every day. When they wake up in the morning, when they come in from school, maybe when they come in from playing with friends or back from a sporting event, whatever it may be. And if you really take the 90 seconds together, you're dealing with about 5 minutes out of your day. But what you do in your first 90 seconds is that you touch the child on the face, the cheek, or the head, and you ask them how their day is. And if they're happy, you portray happiness as well. If they're empathetic, you become a little empathetic as well. If they're sad, I'm sorry you had a bad day. But you mirror the child's emotions at that time, and you show the support for that child and let them talk. And it's only for 90 seconds. And by touching them on their forehead or their head or their cheek and asking these questions, your child will really, you'll create a bond with your child that really says, you know, I'm here, I really do want to hear what you have to say. I do care about you and I do love you.
Now, you touched on this, but how do you recognize when your child is ready to communicate?
Again, it's just really when, you know, we all have gut instincts. You know, this theory that these motherly instincts or maternal instincts, I'm a full-time dad and I'm here to tell you, guys have maternal instincts too. I know when my children want to do certain things and when they want to talk. And I just think you take advantage of those opportunities.
And you're speaking to more than the single parent with some of these communication
Sure.
skills. You also say there is an art to listening, and not always what they're saying verbally, but what they're saying in a roundabout way. What's the key there?
It's really watching what your child's to do. If your child's looking upset, your child's looking sad, there's a reason for it more times than not. And trying to find out what that reason is. I think it's important to always, one thing you can always tell your child is, I understand why you may feel like you feel, but let's talk about it together. You may find that more times than not that your child doesn't want to talk to you, but he at least or she at least knows that you're willing to communicate with them. So sometimes you're building a brownie points bin for a future opportunity, at the end of the day. I think another thing with communicating is your child isn't always going to tell you everything, especially, I have a 16 and 13-year-old. I guarantee you they're not going to tell me everything as time goes on. As much as I would like to think I've got this perfect world and my kids are going to disclose everything. So what I've done that I think is a good tip for all parents out there is, especially single parents out there, I've given both of my children the cell phone number of one person I trust totally. And what I've done that for is they know that they can call that person up at any time if something's gone wrong, if they've done something, if they need to talk, and they're not comfortable doing it with me. And that those two, and my son, my daughter, keep it between them and the person I've given the number to. Now, the reason I've done that is this is someone, as I said, I trust. I would much rather have my children talking to them and getting advice than going to their peer group and getting advice if they're afraid to tell their dad something.